In your daily interactions with children in preschool, it is important that you are sensitive to children's home and community cultures when addressing behaviors that may seem challenging. Watch this video to learn about the importance of understanding culture-based behaviors.
Okay, so if you think of an iceberg, for example, and what you see above the waterline, ice, right? And that's what we see. Children's behavior, that's the tip of the iceberg. What drives those behaviors is what's underneath, what we don't see. And a lot of those is driven by the fact that it's based on those children's experiences at home, in their communities, and the values that are placed, that they're learning, traditions that they have at home, their own perceptions, their own, what their parents tell them, about certain things. There are cultural elements to that. If you think about space, like personal space, you see a behavior of young children who like to sit next to each other, like almost on top of each other if they could, say during circle time in the classroom. And teachers are wondering, like, why do they do that? And then here you are where you want to have to make sure you have your 12 inches of space between, between you and the next person. What drives that behavior are really your own experiences and beliefs about what is personal space. For some children, being close and rubbing shoulders with, against another child is no problem because they grew up in a home where there are 10 other people. And they're just so used to having people around them, and that's how it is because they live in two-bedroom home, and they all kind of just have that, and so it's not an issue for them. Whereas for some children, it could be a sensory issue, or it could be that they live in a home where they're told, you need to give personal space to people, and this is how far you need to, and you learn that culturally. You see people. When some people talk to you too closely, you wonder, like, why do they not realize that they're talking too close? But in fact, if you look underneath that, if you dig deep into that, there are certain things that tell you, oh, because in their family, this is what they do. What happens with young children in particular is that they would engage in these behaviors that people think that they're just engaging in it because they're being like bad kids, when in fact it's just what they grew up with. So what happens is they get labeled as having challenging behaviors or being problem kids, or and when in fact what they grew up knowing to do is that they have to do those in their family. So another example would be a child who keeps interrupting a story reading. Then they're talking on top of other kids, and you have a teacher who thinks that you have to raise your hand if you want to ask a question, one child at a time. But in some cultures, talking on top of each other means that you're engaged, right? And it shows your engagement. But you don't know that unless you really dig deeper and understand that many of these behaviors are really determined by those experiences, those cultures, those values, those traditions. Another good one is eye contact also. So some children, we know that making eye contact is really, really important for learning, and it shows engagement. It shows that you're paying attention. But for some children, making eye contact with an adult is actually a sign of disrespect. And they learn that at home. They learn that in their community. I learned that as a child growing up. I would never make eye contact with my grandmother if I were addressing her, because that's just a sign of respect. But if I were to do that in a classroom setting, or even in a business setting, if I don't make eye contact, I get labeled as somebody who might be, somebody who's squirrely or somebody who's untrustworthy. And yet, beneath that particular behavior, really, there's a basis for why that's occurring. Doesn't mean that children can't learn. it starts with the teacher understanding that first, and then maybe helping children learn some of these skills in the classroom. It's really important for teachers to really recognize children's behaviors, and then recognizing why that's occurring, and then really being a good investigator of what's occurring. Why is it occurring, and what do we not see? And the reason it's important is so that they can better understand, is this something that is truly a challenging behavior that needs to be addressed, or is this something that's really more cultural, or something more that I could just maybe work with this child? What happens is, oftentimes in many of these situations, is that many children are being referred for services or being labeled as somebody who has as having challenging behaviors, when in fact they don't. And you know, and all they need are new skills to understand what the parameters are in their school. It's so for the teacher, before they begin to label, before they even think about referring, is maybe understanding why do children engage in those behaviors and what's beneath those behaviors.